During the 2023 U.S. Open, a WTA umpire allowed Laura Siegemund to repeatedly exceed the shot clock, while at the same time criticizing Coco Gauff for allegedly serving too quickly. After watching her opponent push past the time limit multiple times with almost no consequence, Gauff was eventually forced to approach the chair and demand that the rules be applied equally. By that point, Siegemund had gone over the clock at least 4 times and received just a single warning, making the imbalance so obvious that even the crowd began to turn against her. What followed became a textbook officiating failure that left fans questioning whether the umpire was simply overwhelmed, seriously incompetent, or something worse. To understand why the backlash was so intense, you have to look at how the match actually unfolded. Gauff was facing Siegemund in the first round on home ground at Arthur Ashe Stadium, with a packed crowd firmly behind the American favorite. On paper, Gauff was expected to advance comfortably, but Siegemund came in with a different strategy. She slowed the pace at every opportunity, using gamesmanship to disrupt Gauff's rhythm. The rules are clear. Players are allowed 25 seconds between points, with a visible shot clock counting down to 0. If the clock hits 0 before the serve begins, it's an automatic violation. There's no gray area. Either the time runs out or it doesn't. Yet Siegemund consistently let the clock expire again and again. By Gauff's own count, it happened at least 4 times before she finally spoke up, and still only 1 violation was issued. Meanwhile, Gauff was serving at what she described as a normal, steady pace. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to catch her opponent off guard. She was simply playing within the rules. Somehow, that became an issue. In the third set, the frustration boiled over. Gauff approached the chair and calmly pointed out the imbalance, explaining that her opponent had exceeded the clock multiple times while she was being scrutinized for playing at a reasonable tempo. That wasn't a tantrum or a sign of disrespect. It was a legitimate request for consistent enforcement. The fact that she even had to ask said everything about how poorly the match was being managed. Only later did the umpire finally escalate things, issuing Siegemund a point penalty for another time violation, which helped give Gauff a commanding lead in the deciding set. And then came the most baffling moment of all. Siegemund approached the chair to complain that Gauff was serving too fast, arguing that she needed extra time, even citing towel breaks as justification. The irony was staggering. A player who had repeatedly broken the shot clock was now accusing her opponent of unfair play for following it. There is no rule against serving quickly, and the shot clock exists precisely to prevent the kind of stalling tactics Siegemund was using. Yet instead of shutting the complaint down immediately, the umpire entertained it, turning Gauff's rule following into a controversy while treating repeated violations with sympathy. After the match, Coco Gauff opened up about her frustration in the press conference, and her comments revealed just how much pressure she had been under the entire time. She explained that she stayed patient for most of the match, even though Siegemund had been exceeding the time limit since the opening set. At first, Coco didn't say anything. She kept glancing toward the umpire, expecting the rules to be enforced, but nothing happened. Even on Siegemund's service games, where Coco technically had the right to expect readiness on time, she chose to be accommodating and allowed extra seconds. The real problem began when those delays started happening repeatedly on Coco's own serve as well. What frustrated her most wasn't only the missed time violations. It was the way the umpire handled the flow of the match. The score was often announced several seconds after a point ended, creating the illusion that Coco was rushing through her service routine. In reality, she was serving at a completely normal pace. That delay in announcing the score mattered because it made Coco look like the one breaking the rhythm when she was actually following the rules. Whether that was due to poor timing or simple incompetence doesn't change the outcome. The end result was the same. Coco was framed as the problem while her opponent's repeated violations were overlooked. Coco also admitted that she doesn't enjoy confrontation and struggled internally over whether speaking up was the right thing to do. She spent much of the match debating with herself, weighing the consequences of saying something against staying silent. She didn't want to be labeled as someone who complains. She was conscious of how her actions would be perceived and worried about how quickly public opinion could turn against her if she spoke out. That's an enormous amount of pressure for a 19-year-old to carry. She was playing the first round of the U.S. Open in front of a home crowd, facing an opponent who was clearly bending the rules, yet she was more concerned about how asking for fair enforcement might affect her image. That mindset doesn't come from nowhere. It reflects a player who has learned that standing up for herself can lead to backlash. Coco has said she constantly thinks about how mature she appears because every move she makes is scrutinized. One misstep, one emotional reaction, and critics are ready to tear her down. She was trying to voice legitimate frustration while carefully filtering her words, making sure she remained respectful so her point wouldn't be dismissed. Managing that level of emotional restraint while also trying to win a high-stakes match is an unreasonable burden. The fact that she had to carry all of that simply because an umpire failed to enforce basic, objective rules is unacceptable. Eventually, the situation reached a breaking point. The umpire finally issued Siegemund a point penalty for another shot clock violation, and that moment shifted the momentum decisively in Coco's favor. Siegemund briefly fought back, narrowing the score to 5-4, but Coco held her nerve, closed out the set, and won the match 3-6, 6-2, 6-4. She survived the chaos, advanced, and ultimately went on to win the entire tournament, capturing her first Grand Slam title at just 19 years old. Still, it's hard to ignore how close this officiating failure came to derailing her run before it even began. Siegemund's post-match press conference only added another layer to the controversy. She appeared emotional and tearful, describing how tennis players are performers who owe something to the audience. She said she could go home believing she played well, but felt she received nothing in return from the crowd. According to her, the spectators treated her harshly, as if she were a cheater or someone trying to win through underhanded tactics. She insisted she never smashed rackets, screamed, or made rude gestures, and claimed that despite the tension, she had done nothing wrong. But that claim ignored the core issue. The crowd reaction wasn't about her demeanor. It was about her conduct. She repeatedly violated the shot clock and used delay tactics to disrupt her opponent's rhythm. Those actions earned the hostility she received. Being polite while consistently breaking the rules doesn't make the behavior acceptable, and that disconnect is what made her post-match comments ring hollow. She relied on constant delay tactics to break Coco's rhythm, pushing the boundaries of what was allowed at every opportunity. At the same time, she complained about Coco playing at a completely normal pace, as if following the rules was somehow unfair. That behavior doesn't reflect someone competing within the spirit of the game. It reflects deliberate gamesmanship, using disruption and manipulation to gain an edge. Afterward, Siegemund tried to cast herself as the victim, framing the situation as nothing more than her being slow and receiving a time violation. She suggested the crowd had blown a small issue out of proportion, but the spectators weren't reacting to slowness alone. They were reacting to repeated rule violations being ignored by the umpire, and to the fact that Coco had to stand up for herself just to receive equal treatment. One of Siegemund's final remarks revealed just how much she misunderstood the situation. She compared herself to players who smash rackets, yell, or make rude gestures toward the crowd, implying she was being judged unfairly in comparison. But that comparison completely missed the point. The crowd's reaction had nothing to do with her attitude or manners. It was about her actions on court. Breaking the shot clock multiple times isn't the same as competing fairly while remaining polite. The fact that Siegemund still seemed confused about why the crowd turned against her suggests either a genuine lack of awareness or a deliberate attempt to maintain a victim narrative. Either explanation reflects poorly. The tension from that match didn't disappear with time. When Sky Sports commentator Jonathan Overend previewed Coco and Siegemund's 2025 Wuhan Open meeting, He specifically referenced their U.S. Open clash, calling Siegemund a notoriously slow player and highlighting the frustration caused by delays during their 2023 encounter. Even 2 years later, the match was still being discussed because of how extreme the officiating issues and gamesmanship had been. When asked about facing Siegemund again, Coco handled it professionally, describing her as experienced and tricky and acknowledging it would be a difficult match. But there's no doubt Coco remembered exactly what happened in 2023 and entered that rematch fully prepared for similar tactics. That U.S. Open first-round match exposed deeper problems within tennis officiating that go far beyond a single incident. The first issue is inconsistency in enforcing objective rules like the shot clock. When a rule is clear and measurable, it should be applied the same way every time. If the clock hits 0, a violation should automatically follow. Instead, umpires often allow flexibility based on reputation or perceived intent, creating unfair advantages. Second, officials are too willing to entertain complaints about players who are actually following the rules. When Siegemund accused Coco of serving too fast, that argument should have been shut down immediately. There is no rule against serving quickly, and it's not an umpire's job to regulate comfort levels, only to enforce the rulebook. A third issue is the imbalance in how younger players are treated compared to established veterans. Coco was just 19 and early in her career, while Siegemund had more than a decade of tour experience. That power dynamic clearly influenced how their concerns were handled. When Siegemund stalled, she faced minimal consequences. When Coco asked for enforcement, she had to argue for it. Finally, there's the unrealistic expectation placed on young players to remain endlessly mature and respectful, even when things are clearly unfair. Coco was actively worrying about her image and public perception while navigating an officiating failure. That's an unreasonable burden to place on a teenager who's simply trying to compete. The fallout from this situation brought regret from multiple directions. The umpire faced criticism for failing to apply the rules consistently once the controversy exploded. Siegemund likely regretted tactics that backfired so badly the crowd turned her into the villain. The WTA probably regretted how biased and messy the officiating looked on such a big stage. But there was one person who had no reason for regret. Coco Gauff stood up for herself, demanded fairness, kept her composure, and went on to win the entire tournament. That isn't regret, that's vindication. The 2023 U.S. Open first-round match between Coco Gauff and Laura Siegemund will be remembered as one of the most controversial officiating performances in recent tennis history. Not because of a missed line call or a questionable let, but because an umpire failed to consistently enforce a simple, objective rule. A 19-year-old player was forced to demand equal treatment just to get a fair match. Siegemund violated the shot clock repeatedly with minimal consequences, while Coco followed the rules and was criticized for it. The controversy erupted, the officiating came under national scrutiny, and years later, the match is still referenced as an example of how badly things can go when fairness breaks down.